Chapter 1. The frozen canyon winter had come harsh and unforgiving to the high desert of northern Arizona. 1887. Thomas Blackwood rode his dun gelding along the rim of a nameless canyon, the leather of his saddle creaking beneath him like the complaints of an old man. The late January air bit at his face with teeth of ice, unusual for these parts where the sun typically reigned even in the coldest months. His breath clouded before him, mingling with the steam rising from his horse's nostrils. 3 days since he'd spoken to another soul. 3 months since he'd left behind the wreckage of his former life in Colorado. The solitude suited him now, a man carrying more ghosts than possessions. "Easy there, Hank," Thomas murmured as the horse hesitated at the canyon's edge. Below, the shadows gathered thick and blue against red stone walls. This was Navajo country, and though the nearest settlement was 2 days' ride, Thomas felt the weight of eyes upon him. Not human ones perhaps, but the land itself seemed to watch, to judge, to remember. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of wood smoke. Thomas stiffened in the saddle. He wasn't alone out here after all. His hand moved instinctively to the Colt revolver at his hip, then fell away. He hadn't drawn that gun against a man since Leadville, and he'd sworn it would stay that way. Following the scent, he guided Hank along a treacherous path down into the canyon. The temperature dropped as they descended, the air growing dense with cold that seemed to seep into his bones. Ice clung to the north-facing walls, sheets of it catching the low winter sun and fracturing light into pale rainbows. It was then that he saw a peculiar formation in the ice near the canyon floor. Something dark was suspended within the frozen cascade that had formed from a spring above. Something human-shaped. Thomas dismounted, his boots crunching on the frozen ground. He approached slowly, squinting against the glare. A body, trapped within the ice. His stomach tightened. He'd seen death before, had dealt it with his own hands, but this felt different. Sacred somehow. Or sacrilegious. A tomb not meant for his eyes. As he drew closer, he saw with a start that it was a woman, a native woman, her long black hair fanning out around her as if she floated in water rather than stood captured in ice. Her eyes were closed, her expression peaceful. She wore a deerskin dress adorned with intricate beadwork that marked her as Navajo. "Lord Almighty," he whispered, the words falling heavy in the silent canyon. Then her eyes opened. Thomas stumbled backward, nearly losing his footing on the icy ground. It wasn't possible. No one could survive being frozen solid. Yet there she was, her dark eyes tracking his movement through the distortion of the ice, his heart hammering against his ribs. Thomas drew his hunting knife and began to chip away at the ice. It was slow work, his fingers growing numb despite his leather gloves. The woman's gaze never left his face, yet he detected no fear in her eyes, only a deep, abiding patience that made him wonder how long she had been waiting there. "I'm going to get you out," he said, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "Just hold on." The sun was sinking toward the canyon rim when he finally broke through to her face, allowing her to draw a shuddering breath. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't understand. Navajo, he presumed. He worked faster, freeing her shoulders, then her arms. When at last he pulled her from the remaining ice, she collapsed against him, her body impossibly warm for someone who had been encased in ice. He wrapped his wool coat around her, trembling, for him, and carried her to where Hank waited patiently. "Can you understand me?" he asked, as he set her down on a patch of dry ground. "Do you speak English?" She regarded him through eyes as dark and fathomless as a midnight sky. "Yes," she said finally, her voice rough with disuse. "I understand your words, Cowboy. My name's Thomas. Thomas Blackwood. What's yours?" She hesitated, as if weighing whether to trust him with this knowledge. "I am called Nijoni among my people." "Nijoni," he repeated, the unfamiliar name awkward on his tongue. How were you in the ice? You should be dead." A smile touched her lips, enigmatic and fleeting as summer lightning. "There are places in this world where time moves differently, places where the spirits walk between worlds." She looked up at the canyon walls, tinged red with the dying sunlight. "You live in such a place, Cowboy," Thomas frowned. "I don't live anywhere, just passing through." "No," she said with unexpected firmness. "Your home, the cabin beneath the Twin Peaks where lightning strikes each summer, the place of spirits." The chill that passed through Thomas had nothing to do with the winter air. He had told no one about the abandoned trapper's cabin he'd claimed as his own 2 months ago, nestled high in a remote valley beneath 2 distinctive mountain peaks. How could she possibly know? "We should make camp," he said, changing the subject. "Night's coming, and it gets cruel cold down here." As he busied himself gathering what sparse wood could be found, he felt Nijoni's eyes following him, measuring to him with a knowledge he couldn't begin to fathom. The woman was a mystery, one that, despite his better judgment, he found himself wanting to solve. They sat across from each other as the small fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows against the canyon walls. Thomas offered her jerky and hardtack from his provisions, which she accepted with dignified gratitude. "Tomorrow I'll take you to your people," he said. "Which direction is your home?" Nijoni lifted her gaze from the flames. "My home is gone, my family with it." "I'm sorry," Thomas said, the words inadequate against what he recognized as a grief that mirrored his own. The soldiers came in the night, she continued, her voice flat, devoid of the emotion he knew must churn beneath. They burned everything. I ran to the canyon to hide. Then the cold came, and the ice. She shook her head. I thought I would die there. Thomas said nothing. There was nothing to say. He knew about soldiers and midnight raids, about the things men did in the name of progress, of civilization. He'd worn the blue uniform himself once, before Colorado, before Leadville. Why did you free me? Najoni asked suddenly. Thomas considered the question, turning it over like a strange coin in his mind. Couldn't just leave you there. Many would have. I'm not many. She studied him then, really studied him, as if peeling back the layers of dust and regret that had accumulated over his soul. No, she said finally. You are not. You carry a darkness within you, Thomas Blackwood, but also light. The way she said his name as if she'd known it long before he told her sent another shiver through him. We should get some rest, he said, uncomfortable with her perception. It's a long ride tomorrow. To the place of spirits, she said. Not a question but a statement of fact. Thomas wanted to deny it, to tell her he'd be taking her to the nearest town or Navajo settlement. But something in her eyes, something ancient and knowing the words in his throat. Yes, he said instead, surprised by his own answer. To the place of spirits. As he settled into his bedroll, the fire burning low between them, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that in freeing Najoni from the ice, he had set in motion events beyond his understanding. Tomorrow they would ride for his cabin beneath the Twin Peaks, and there perhaps he would begin to unravel the mystery of the woman who had survived the impossible. Sleep came to him slowly, and when it did, he dreamed of ice that whispered with the voices of the dead. Chapter 2. The journey north. They rode together on Hank the Dungelding, bearing their weight with stoic patience as they climbed from the canyon's depths. Najoni sat before Thomas in the saddle, her back straight and dignified despite the proximity that necessity forced upon them. Her hair, now dry, carried the scent of sage and juniper, reminding Thomas of the high country in summer. Morning light spilled over the eastern rim, painting the red stone walls with gold. The ice that had imprisoned Najoni glittered like a massive jewel, already beginning to surrender to the day's warmth. Thomas found himself wondering if it would vanish entirely, taking with it any evidence of the impossible thing he had witnessed. How long? Najoni asked, breaking the silence that had accompanied them since dawn. 2 days to the cabin, if the weather holds, Thomas replied, his voice close to her ear. She nodded once. The spirits will protect our journey. Thomas had no response to that. He had long ago stopped believing in protection from above or beyond. His God had abandoned him on a blood-soaked street in Leadville, or perhaps even earlier, in the snow-covered battlefields where he had fought. For a cause that grew more hollow with each passing year, they traveled north through country that grew increasingly harsh and beautiful, mesas rising like ancient monuments, valleys cut deep by rivers that had flowed since before man walked the earth. Juniper and pine dotted the landscape, their twisted forms testifying to lives shaped by wind and drought and cold. You're far from Navajo land, Thomas observed as they stopped to rest Hank at midday. What brought you so deep into the canyon? Country. Najoni accepted the strip of jerky he offered but did not immediately answer. Her eyes scanned to the horizon as if reading a language written in stone and sky. My grandmother was a healer, she finally said. When she died, I was to take her place. I came to the canyons, seeking visions, guidance. A shadow passed over her face while I was gone. The soldiers came. The reservation is not my home. She cut him off, a flint edge to her voice. They would fence us in like cattle, take our children to their schools, teach them to forget who they are. She met his gaze directly. Would you choose such a life? Thomas Blackwood. He couldn't hold her eyes. No, he admitted. I wouldn't, and yet your people demand we must. They're not my people anymore, he said quietly. Haven't been for some time. Something in his tone must have conveyed the truth of it, for her expression softened. What happened in the place you call Leadville? Thomas stiffened. He hadn't mentioned Leadville to her, had he? The name had haunted his dreams, yes, but he was certain he hadn't spoken it aloud. How do you know about Leadville? He asked, his voice rough with suspicion. You called out in your sleep, she said simply. That name, and others, Emma, Samuel. The sound of those names on her lips sent a jolt through him like a physical blow. He turned away, busying himself with checking Hank's saddle straps, though they both knew it was unnecessary. We should keep moving, he said. Still have daylight to burn. They rode in silence after that, the space between them charged with unspoken questions. The land grew more rugged as they traveled north, scrub giving way to sparse pine forests as they gained elevation. By evening, the first flakes of snow began to fall, gentle at first, then with increasing urgency. Storm's coming, Thomas said, eyeing the darkening sky. We'll need shelter. Najoni pointed to a rocky outcropping ahead. There, the natural overhang wasn't much, but it would block the wind and hold the heat of a fire. Thomas worked quickly to gather wood before the snow made it impossible, while Najoni arranged stones in a peculiar pattern that he assumed was Navajo tradition. As darkness fell, they huddled near the small fire, the snow now falling thick beyond the shelter of rock. Thomas pulled his coat tighter, offering Nijoni the single blanket he carried. "You'll freeze," she observed, though she accepted it. "Been colder," he said with a shrug. She studied him across the flames, her eyes reflecting the fire like twin stars. "You are a man running from ghosts, Thomas Blackwood." He gave a bitter laugh. "Aren't we all?" "No," she said seriously. "Most run towards something: safety, wealth, power. You run only away." The accuracy of her assessment struck him like a physical blow. "And what about you?" he countered. "What are you running toward?" "I am not running at all," she said. "I am returning to where you said your home is gone." "Home is not always a place." She looked up at him, and for a moment Thomas thought he saw something ancient in her eyes. Something that didn't belong in the face of a woman so young. Sometimes it is a purpose. The wind howled outside their shelter, driving snow into fantastic shapes. Thomas added another branch to the fire, watching the sparks rise toward the stone ceiling. "In Leadville," he began, surprising himself, "I killed a man, a boy, really, couldn't have been more than 17. The words felt strange in his mouth, like pebbles he'd been holding under his tongue for too long. "He drew on me in a saloon. I was faster." Nijoni said nothing, simply waiting for him to continue. "His name was Samuel Reston." His sister Emma, Thomas's voice caught. "She came at me with his own gun after he fell. I didn't mean to, but she was so close, and the gun went off when I tried to take it from her." The fire popped and hissed, as a bit of sap caught flame. "So now you hide in the mountains," Nijoni said, "punishing yourself." "Punishment would be a mercy," Thomas replied. "This is just existence." Nijoni pulled the blanket around her shoulders, her expression solemn. "In the firelight. Perhaps the place of spirits called you for a reason, Thomas Blackwood. Perhaps it calls us both." Outside, the storm raged on, burying the land in white silence. Inside their small shelter, something fragile began to form between them. Not trust, not yet, but the recognition of shared wounds, shared solitude. Thomas watched as Nijoni's eyes grew heavy, her head nodding toward her chest. Even in sleep she maintained that strange dignity, that sense of purpose he couldn't begin to understand. Tomorrow they would reach the cabin beneath the Twin Peaks, and there, perhaps, he would learn why this woman who should be dead called his reluctant home the place of spirits. Chapter 3. The Twin Peaks. They crested the final ridge as afternoon light slanted golden across the valley. Thomas felt Nijoni stiffened in the saddle before him, her breath catching as the Twin Peaks came into view, two jagged spires of dark stone, nearly identical, rising from the northern edge of the small valley like sentinels. Between them, nestled in a stand of ponderosa pine, sat the cabin, a thin ribbon of smoke rising from its stone chimney. "Someone's there," Thomas said, his hand instinctively moving to his holster. "No," Nijoni replied with quiet certainty. "The fire burns, but no one tends it." Thomas frowned. He'd left no fire burning when he'd ridden out 3 days prior, yet he couldn't deny the evidence before his eyes smoked clear against the late afternoon sky. Hank picked his way down the snow-covered slope, hooves breaking through the crust with each careful step. The storm had been kinder here. Only 6 inches of fresh powder blanketed the valley floor rather than the drifts they'd struggled through at higher elevations. "How did you know about this place?" Thomas asked, the question that had gnawed at him since the canyon finally finding voice. Nijoni was silent for so long he thought she might not answer. When she spoke, her voice was soft, almost lost in the whisper of wind through pine boughs. "It has always been known among my people, a sacred place where the veils between worlds grow thin." She tilted her head back slightly, her profile sharp against the winter light. "But that is not why I spoke of it. I saw it in my dreams while in the ice. I saw you there, waiting." A chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air settled between Thomas's shoulder blades. "I don't believe in such things." "What you believe does not change what is true," she said simply. They rode the rest of the way in silence, the only sounds the creak of leather and Hank's labored breathing. As they approached the cabin, Thomas scanned the surrounding trees, the pristine snow, looking for tracks, for any sign of another presence. There were none. Yet smoke continued to rise from the chimney. He dismounted first, helping Nijoni down before drawing his Colt. "Stay with Hank," he instructed, his voice low. She ignored him, moving past him, toward the cabin door with calm certainty. Thomas bit back a curse and followed, snow crunching beneath his boots. The cabin was as he had left it, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed against the far wall. Clean spars, impersonal, a place to exist, not to live. The fire burned low and the great flames licking at the remains of logs that should have been ash days ago. "How is this possible?" Thomas murmured, holstering his gun. Nijoni moved to the fire, extending her hands toward its warmth. "The place of spirits provides," she said, as if this explained everything. Thomas shook his head and busied himself with practicalities and saddling Hank, bringing in firewood, melting snow for water. The familiar routine steadied him. Pushing away questions that had no answers he was prepared to accept. Night fell swiftly, as it always did in the mountains. Thomas lit the oil lamp that hung from a ceiling beam, casting the cabin in warm yellow light. Nijoni sat at the table, watching him with those fathomless eyes as he prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork. "Tomorrow I'll ride to the settlement," he said, placing a tin plate before her. "Get you proper supplies. Maybe find someone who knows if any of your people survived." "There is no need," she replied. "I know what I must do now." Thomas paused, spoon halfway to his mouth. "And what's that?" "I must prepare this place. They will come with the spring thaw." "Who will come?" "Those who seek healing, those who are lost." She met his gaze directly. "Those like you, Thomas Blackwood." He set down his spoon. "I'm not looking to run a boarding house for lost souls, ma'am." The ghost of a smile touched her lips. "It is not your decision to make. The spirits have chosen this place. They have chosen you." "I don't believe in spirits," he said again, more firmly this time. "The eagle does not believe in the air," she replied. "Yet it is the air that holds him aloft." Thomas had no answer for that. They finished their meal in silence as the fire popped and hissed in the grate. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling around the eaves in a lonesome song. Later, as Thomas spread his bedroll on the floor, insisting Nijoni take the narrow bed, she spoke again. "You asked how I survived in the ice." Thomas paused, looking up at her. The lamplight caught the planes of her face, highlighting cheekbones sharp as flint. "Some of my people possess the ability to walk between worlds," she continued. "My grandmother had this gift. She passed it to me before she died." Nijoni's fingers worked at the beaded necklace she wore. "When the ice took me, I did not die because I was not fully in this world. I was elsewhere." "Elsewhere," Thomas repeated flatly. "In the place where spirits dwell, where time moves differently." She looked around the cabin, her gaze lingering on the dark corners where the lamplight didn't reach. "This place touches that world. That is why the fire burns without tending. Why I knew of it while trapped in ice." Thomas settled onto his bedroll, pulling the blanket up to his chest. "Get some rest," he said, unwilling to continue down a path that made no sense to his practical mind. "Been a long couple of days." Nijoni lay back on the bed, her profile outlined against the log wall. "The dead are not gone, Thomas Blackwood," she said softly. "They walk beside us, always. Sometimes, in places like this, we can hear them whisper." Thomas rolled onto his side, putting his back to her, but sleep was long in coming, and when it did, he dreamed of ice and fire, of Emma Reston's eyes as the light left them, and of twin peaks that watched like silent judges over a valley where the rules of the world seemed suddenly, terrifyingly fluid. Chapter 4. What the Snow Reveals. Dawn broke pale and silent over the valley. Thomas woke to find Nijoni already up, standing at the cabin's single window, her silhouette dark against the growing light. Outside, the world was transformed. Snow had fallen in the night, erasing their tracks, creating a canvas unmarked by human presence. "You spoke in your sleep again," she said without turning. Thomas sat up, rubbing a hand across his face. "What did I say? You asked for forgiveness." Now she turned, her eyes finding his across the room, not from God, but from them, from Emma and Samuel. The names hung in the air between them like smoke. Thomas looked away first, busying himself with rebuilding the fire that had somehow, impossibly, continued to smolder through the night. "There's no forgiveness for some things," he said finally, his voice rough with sleep and regret. "Perhaps not from the living," Nijoni agreed, "but the dead see with different eyes." Thomas wanted to dismiss her words, to cling to the comfortable weight of his guilt. It had been his companion for so long now that the prospect of its absence left him unmoored, adrift in possibilities he wasn't sure he deserved. They shared a breakfast of coffee and the last of the salt pork. Thomas found himself studying the precise way she held the tin cup, the stillness that seemed to emanate from her core. Since bringing her from the ice, he had seen her as someone to help, to deliver to safety. Now he wondered if perhaps she was the one guiding him. "I need to check the snare lines," he said, rising from the table. "We'll need meat if we're staying." She nodded as if his decision to remain had been a foregone conclusion. Perhaps it had been from the moment he'd chipped her free from the ice outside. The cold hit him like a physical blow. Thomas pulled his coat tighter and set off toward the eastern ridge where he'd set snares for rabbit. The snow made for difficult walking, but the exertion warmed him, and the clean bite of winter air cleared his head. He was checking the third snare empty like the first two when he noticed the tracks, human footprints, heading north along the ridge. Fresh ones, pressed into snow that had fallen just hours ago. Thomas straightened, hand moving to his Colt. He followed the tracks with his eyes. They continued over the ridge, and down toward the northern edge of the valley, toward the Twin Peaks. Against his better judgment, he followed the tracks led him to a clearing at the base of the peaks, a natural amphitheater formed by the curve of the mountainside. There the footprints stopped abruptly, as if their maker had simply vanished. Thomas turned slowly, scanning the tree line, the rocky slopes, seeing nothing but pristine snow and stone. He called, his voice swallowed by the vastness. Only the wind answered, whistling between the twin spires of rock above. As Thomas turned to leave, something caught his eye, a flash of color against the white. He approached cautiously, kneeling, to examine what looked like fabric poking through the snow. Using his gloved hands, he brushed away the powder to reveal a small cloth doll, the kind a child might cherish. Its dress was faded blue calico, its face embroidered with simple black thread. Thomas lifted it, turning it over in his hands. It was old but well made, clearly loved, and it hadn't been there long. The snow beneath it was undisturbed, as if it had been placed deliberately rather than lost. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran through him. He pocketed the doll and made his way back to the cabin, unable to shake the feeling that he was being watched by eyes he couldn't see. Najoni was outside when he returned, gathering pine boughs. She straightened as he approached immediately, noting his expression. "You found something," she said. Not a question. Thomas pulled the doll from his pocket, holding it out to her. "Someone's been here. Tracks heading toward the peaks." Then nothing, just this. Najoni took the doll, cradling it in her palms. Her face softened, a smile touching her lips. "Ah," she said. "It begins." "What begins?" Thomas demanded, his patience wearing thin. "What is happening here?" She looked up at him, her dark eyes reflecting the winter sky. "Healing, Thomas Blackwood. For them, for you." "Who left the doll?" "You know who," she said gently. And with a sudden, terrible clarity, he did know. He had bought just such a doll, in Denver, 2 years ago. A gift for a little girl with her mother's eyes and her father's smile. Emma Reston's daughter orphaned by his hand. "That's not possible," he whispered. "In the place of spirits, the walls between worlds grow thin," Najoni said, offering the doll back to him. "The dead may reach across, if their need is great. If your need is greater." Thomas stared at the doll in his trembling hand. A gift, not an accusation. A bridge, not a barrier. A beginning, not an end. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked. His voice barely audible. Najoni's hand came to rest on his arm, warm and solid and real. "Live, Thomas Blackwood. Help those who will come, and when the time is right, you will follow the tracks to their end, and find what waits for you there." Thomas looked up at the Twin Peaks, stark against the winter sky. For the first time since Leadville, he felt something stir within him that might, with care and time, grow into hope. "I don't know if I can," he admitted. "You already have begun," Najoni said, gesturing toward the cabin. "You freed me from the ice. You brought me to this place. The spirits chose well." As they walked back to the cabin together, Thomas felt the weight of the doll in his pocket, a small thing, impossibly heavy with meaning. Above them, the Twin Peaks stood silent, watching, waiting, and in the valley between, a place once merely of existence began its slow transformation into something else entirely. A place of spirits, a place of healing, a place, at long last, of home.